Welcome to Our Family Matters podcast. I am attorney Keith Pickard at Nevada Family Law Group.
This is attorney Jordan Garcia, also a partner at Nevada Family Law Group.
So today we're going to be talking about child custody and co-parenting. This is probably one of the most I want to say high conflict, but one of the areas that we get the most contention about.
You mean it's an oxymoron, co-parenting and divorce
it,
and child custody?
It often is, yeah. But if there are no kids involved, the divorce usually goes a little easier unless they're just at each other's throats. But when you involve kids, that's when things start getting a little more dicey, a little more high conflict. And we're not going to talk about high conflict per se. We're not focusing on high conflict cases, but let's talk about child custody. We probably spend half of our practice on child issues,
Easily.
child custody issues.
Oh, yeah.
And so most of our consults will involve issues surrounding the kids. Now, hopefully, the parents are able to co-parent well, right? Yes, that can be an oxymoron. But at the end of the day, what we're hoping for is to help people get to a point where, okay, their relationship with their co-parent is ended. They're no longer living in the same place. We're going to be exchanging the children. How can we pull that off smoothly? And, the one thing that the courts and the legislatures made clear is that the sole consideration for determining custody is the best interest of the kids. We'll talk a little bit about, what that best interest standard is. But at the end of the day, hopefully all the parents coming to the table have that in mind.
Well, and it's one of the factors, one of the probably most significant factors that the court looks at if it's an issue when we determine custody. And then we've got the two kinds of custody that we have to worry about, legal and physical. People come in, they always give me that blank look at, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And the way I always describe it, because I think legal custody is the most difficult to kind of get your hands around, is the three areas that people have the most issues with. And I say, when you have legal custody, and usually it's joint legal custody is your ability to have information about your child. That means information about their schooling, information about what does the doctor's office say, information about what they're doing as far as, activities. The right to make decisions about those things. So deciding which school they go to, deciding whether they get a certain procedure, deciding whether they are in a soccer league or whatever, and the right to participate with each of those things. Can you participate by going to the school and doing things with the child? Can you participate by going to the doctor's appointments and interacting with the child and the doctor? Can you go to the activities? Can you be at the soccer game in the stands cheering on your child? Because if you don't have joint legal custody, you can't do all those things.
Right. Well, and the thing that amazes me sometimes is how people think that they want to exclude the other parent from those decisions. Forget the fact that there's a legal presumption. In other words, the court has to order that unless you can come in and show that that would be inappropriate. And that usually comes down to, is it the other parent a threat to the child's welfare or safety? Absent that, you're going to have joint. And it works against them. It works against their own interests if they're trying to exclude the other parent from those decisions. Not only are you going to get the other co-parents back up, but the child ultimately may suffer from that. So the courts don't go there. Now, that's not to say we do the same thing with physical custody. Physical custody is more of a practical consideration. Who can take the kids? And in fact, in the initial discussion, we have a test that says, well, are both parents able to take the child for at least 146 days out of the year, which is about a 40% marker. Doesn't mean that we call it necessarily call it joint legal custody joint physical custody if you get a little less than 40% or more than 40%. It's a guideline, right? But that's the initial determination. The parties can call it whatever they want. But at the end of the day, there are some things that attach to that, like child support. So usually we're going to see people shooting for joint. But the social science that went behind the legislation is pretty clear that children tend to do best when they have both parents participating in their lives.
And participating in a good way.
Yeah, right, right. And if you don't participate in a good way, that's when the court's going to weigh in, right? But the assumption is that all things being equal, that both parents are moderately capable of being a parent, then they're going to get to be. And even if someone, something that just amazes me is how some of the judges will tend to gravitate towards, well, during the marriage, somebody stayed home and the other went out to work. And so we're going to keep it that way. Well, wait a minute. Those were based on agreements of the parties at the time of the marriage. Those are off the table now. We can't enforce the expectations and the, what was established during the marriage during the, post-divorce period. And most of the judges get it. And that's why we drafted the language of the statute the way we did, was to make sure that it's a perspective, it's a forward-looking view.
Which
And
most of the judges get, not all of them,
yeah,
most of them.
most of them do.
And it's not just married people, it's people who just have kids
No,
together
that's
too.
right.
It's the same deal.
That's right. I was just reading yesterday I don't remember if it was a paper or something online, but we have gone from 72% of couples married in the 1950s to now just barely over 50% of parents being married. That's kind of surprising to me. But at the end of the day, not all parents, in fact, a good number aren't married. And fortunately, we've got the law in a place where those types of differences are considered. It really just comes down to what's in the best interest of the child.
Yeah, but the other parent's being a bad parent. Why do I have to let them have custody?
Yeah.
Isn't that the complaint you hear all the time?
It is. And, even if maybe they weren't around, I have a case right now where dad left. The relationship was so toxic, he went home. He moved across the country. Now, he wised up. He came back, and now they're trying to figure it out. And the courts are going to let people step up. And moms do that too, right? I have another case where mom was the one who disappeared for a month and a half, no contact. But that doesn't matter. They're here. They're available. They're going to be allowed to step up and be a parent.
Well, the funny thing that I always tell clients in consults, which this comes up all the time, which is they're telling me how bad the other person is a parent. They didn't take care of this. They didn't show up for the games. They didn't really participate in this education that much. And I turn to them and I say, I understand all that. You probably got somebody who's not going to be a great parent in your child's life. But did they abuse him? Did they neglect him? Do they abuse him or neglect him to the point that CPS had to get involved?
Right.
No. All right. Well, guess what? Unfortunately, you have a constitutional right, an absolute constitutional right to be a bad parent. You have a right to be a bad parent. We don't let government come in and say, your parenting is bad, and so you don't get to have custody of your kid. That's not the law. Now, sure, you can be parenting so bad that it would be to get to that level. But in general, just because you're not the best parent doesn't mean you don't get joint custody.
Yeah, I tell people all the time that if CPS hasn't removed the child, neither is the judge. The judge isn't going to do it either. So let's not go there. Now, if there's abuse, we've all had cases where there's legitimate abuse taking place that hasn't been reported. Okay, well, CPS isn't going to remove the kids if it's not reported. And the judge will take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But if there's evidence, if there's the handprint on the bottom,
Right.
okay, the judge is going to take notice of that. But absent that, if it's not actually threatening the safety of the child, it's usually not worth arguing about.
And anymore, even when it is those kinds of situations, the judges have gotten to a point where it's like, but show me something more.
Yeah.
Show me something more than a one-time incident. I mean, obviously there's certain levels, but
Right.
minor levels of stuff where they're just like, all right, show me something more. I understand that. But look, this is here we are, and we've got this presumption of joint custody, joint legal, joint physical. I need something more.
Yeah. And what I'll often hear the judge ask is, well, did you call police? Did you raise the level of alarm outside of your home? And if not, they almost treat it like it never happened, or at least they discount it significantly.
Well, and they give you enough rope to hang yourself by. I
Yeah,
feel that's
absolutely.
what it is. It's like, all right, well, if this person really is as bad as you are saying they are, let's see how they act during this case. We've got, 6 months or so to a trial, right? So the process we start, we file a complaint. serve, open the case, or if there's a case already open, we file a motion to modify custody, whatever. 6 weeks or so later, we see a judge, unless there's an emergency. We see the judge for the first time. They hear the case. They may or may not make temporary orders, and then they're going to set us for a trial that's 3 to 6 months later, right? Well, that 3 to 6 month time period before we get to a trial, okay, here's joint custody. Let's see how you behave. And I've had people where they behave. I've also had people screw it up and they
Yeah,
hang
they hang
themselves.
themselves. Yeah, yeah. And the as what I find interesting is as hard as we try to prepare our clients, right? As hard as we try to advise them, sometimes they just don't. They can't get out of their own way
Yeah,
because they're so stuck on how they do things that they're not really listening. They're not paying attention. They're not recognizing that somebody else is about to make a significant decision for them and they need to be on their best behavior. Now, that has, that's a bit of a two-edged sword, right? Because then at least we see what they're really going to be like. And again, they have a constitutional right, as you said. They get to be the parent they are. And we don't remove parents just because they aren't ideal. That's what the dependency cases, the abuse and neglect cases are all about. But they are about wrapping that parent with services so that they can learn. The expectation is they're going to get their kids back.
right.
So yeah, this is probably one of the hardest things I've seen, or that I've experienced. Parents getting their arms around is they're going to have about half the time with their kids. I had a client who really didn't want to divorce because it meant that she would have only half of the time
Seeing the
watching
kids.
her kids grow up.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it only takes one person to divorce, and then the court's going to figure out the custody, and hopefully we can get into some of the co-parenting things naturally. That they'll do it cooperatively. That they will share the information about the doctors and the schools. That they'll make those decisions together and cooperatively.
Well, and that's what it's some people, because they've had a relationship where they weren't cooperative through the relationship either.
Right.
And so they get to this point and they're like, well, this is how we've always related with each other. And it's like, but you can't now, because now you've got a third party looking over what you're doing. And if you want to avoid having the judge, even if you don't lose custody, you don't want the judge looking at you are the problem child. You are the problem in this case. And therefore,
Right.
everything through the flow of the case will go against you, because there's a lot more than just custody that can be decided in the case.
Sure.
And if you get the appearance of being the bad actor because you're not co-parenting, you're not cooperating with the other side, those other things come back and bite you in other ways. I've seen that so many times, and I got a case recently where, the parties are, there's a lot of other hostilities, reasons going on in the background, but the way they've communicated with each other has never been good, never been ideal by any means. And so when you ask either side of them, they're both like, well, no, I ain't going to do that. Not productive. Not
Right.
productive for the child. Not the court's not going to like it. Everybody's going to be unhappy in that case. But also small things, things that most people probably overlook that would be basic for co-parenting. Like, for example, well, we've got this schedule that says, you get Sunday through Wednesday and you get Thursday through Sunday. That's our parenting schedule. Well, I've got a wedding coming up next weekend. Can I have the whole weekend? No, that's my time.
Yeah.
You're talking about losing one day out of a whole year potentially that you're giving up so the other person can celebrate which should be a positive thing with the children or child involved and their family having this wedding, and you're shutting it down because it's your time that one day.
Yeah.
That's where the co-parenting, that's where I see it fall apart all the time. It's like, look, you need to get a reality check.
Yeah.
It's just one day. You're going to at some point in the future want something similar for yourself. And you're going to say, well, but my reason's more important than their reason. No, no.
Yeah, and we can address a lot of these things in the parenting plan. In fact, a good parenting plan usually sets people up for success. But it's got to be underwritten by this idea of cooperation, of give and take, being willing to allow the other parent to establish those one-offs in a way that doesn't become a fight. And if you can do that, then the parenting plan is more likely to succeed. Particularly, one of the things that I've seen just came to mind anyway was the difference between like a 2-2-3 schedule, which is where one parent has Monday, Tuesday, the other parent has Thursday, Friday, or I'm sorry, Wednesday, Thursday.
Yes.
Start again. One parent has Monday, Tuesday, the other parent has Wednesday, Thursday, and then they alternate Friday,
Which I
Saturday,
love
Sunday.
that schedule.
I do too, for small kids, right? But not for, middle school and high schoolers who now have their own lives there. They've got peers they want to spend time with. That makes it more difficult, particularly if the parents live some distance apart. But these are all things that can be considered in the parenting plan and should be. But what happens when the kid comes home and says, "Hey, Susie in my class has this birthday party. I want to go to it, but it's on the other parent's time."
Right.
Okay, you should be talking about those things.
And it shouldn't be a result where the child is the one that suffers, because ultimately
Right.
that's what the judge is looking for. Not what's your situation, not what's your situation. The judge should be, and usually is, focused not on what the parties, but from the point of view of the child. And people miss that. They see it from
Yeah.
their eyes. They got these blinders on. It's like, but this is my time and this is what I'm doing. It's like, okay, but what about the child?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's absolutely the case in 99% of the time, right? There's that 1% where maybe it is important for the child to maybe it's a parent's wedding. And maybe it's going to take them across the weekend. Maybe it's going to take a week, and it's not scheduled during their normal vacation period time, right? It undermines your own case if you object to those things.
Well, and the other thing I see frequently when you got to is that there's other children from other relationships.
Oh yeah,
And so when you're looking at a parenting plan and you're trying to work it out, be cognizant that they have half siblings or step siblings, and these step siblings, they've grown up for years, so they're just as much siblings as half and full
yeah.
siblings.
The kids don't know the difference.
They don't know the difference,
Yeah.
and so they may have things that they're doing with that other child, and they want to include the siblings.
Yeah.
And just from a personal level, the relationship with you have with my siblings and siblings is so important to your life and for your entire life. Like, you got to encourage that bond. You've got to make sure that is something that's important. Just because you don't like what that parent's doing, you don't like that you may not even not like their other half sibling. Your child might. Your
Yeah.
child has a bond there, and it's important for them to be as part of those things. So you've got to work. Hey, they're going to spend 2 hours at a birthday party, and the other kids, your kid's invited. Let them go.
Yeah.
Let them go. And if it really isn't that important, hey, I only get a weekend. I only get every other weekend, and you're cutting into my every other weekend. Ask for another weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, and this goes directly to the statutory factors that the court has to look at, right? Not only do we look at the importance of sibling rivalries, and if somebody wants to look it up, it's NRS 125C0035 sub 4, right? There's a dozen factors in there. Some of them won't apply to most cases, like the appointment of a guardianship usually doesn't apply. But if the kid's old enough to express a preference, they get to that. The judge looks at that, right? What does the child want? The one that I find most important probably is the willingness of the parents to cooperate to make sure that the other co-parent has a relationship with the kids.
Right.
If you get in the way of that, your boat is taken on water, right? It may not be sunk, but it's taken on water. And then the other one that's closely related to that is, can the parents cooperate to meet the needs of the kid? So if you come in and you say, nope, that's my time, even if it is, you're only getting every other weekend, right? It's no, that's my time. I'm taking my time. I don't want to have less time. The judge is looking at this from the perspective of, what does the kid need?
Right.
And then, they look at, well, you're going to have these discussions until the kid's 18. So if we're talking about a 1-year-old, that's really more about the parent, not the child wanting that time, right?
Exactly.
And so we get into these situations where the parents are looking at this fairly myopically and not really viewing it the way the judge would. Now, that's where we come in, right? And that's about what we call client control. Um,
Absolutely.
but it's about making sure our clients are educated. At least they know what the judge is looking at. And so we go through these factors, and there's, as I said, there's a dozen of them, but they're all important. In fact, the courts have to look at all of them, and so we as attorneys have to weigh each one and show the court, well, this is why it weighs for or against us. But the parents need to understand the broader picture is you got to pay attention to what's in the best interest of the child, and if you're not, you're going to lose.
And well, and what I hear all the time though is, but the other side's getting away with murder.
Yeah.
Why am I doing all? I'm doing everything you say. I'm doing all the good stuff. They're getting away with. I want to do what they're doing. I want to be bad too, kind
Yeah.
of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's surprising how often that happens.
And so it's like, yes, the other side's doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, and you're not getting an immediate reaction from the judge necessarily. They're like, hammering the other side, but they are taking note every time.
Yeah.
They are taking note. And if this does have to go to trial for whatever reason or an evidentiary hearing, it matters then. You didn't think it mattered earlier, but I surprising how much the judges remember about the little bad acts that then affect either the credibility, they affect how they perceive the other side's potential testimony, and if you don't at that time, maybe you come back to court a year
Right.
later. And all of a sudden, the judge says, "But the last time you here, sir, you were doing this, that, and the other
Yeah.
thing, and you're doing it again. I'm kind of over it."
Yeah. Well, I have a case right now where dad is ex-military, right? And I made the mistake of saying to him, well, sometimes we have to lose a battle to win the war. And he said, that's not how it works. It's attack, 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 right? And I said, okay, bad analogy. I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, we won't go down that road again. But look, there's a reason why we're taking a beating now. Yeah, they're getting away with murder, but we're noting this. We're logging it. We're recording it so that when the time comes, we can say, well, judge, let me, enlighten you. Let me show you the whole picture. And guess what? It came up. We couldn't reach an agreement. We thought we were driving towards settlement, but it turns out the other side apparently never intended to settle. And so we got to bring all this stuff up. When, we couldn't reach a settlement, it's like, okay, we need some temporary orders. And now we've got all this evidence showing how we were trying to be accommodating. We were trying to reach agreement. We were trying to find the least offensive way of getting this done. And they were always, nope, that doesn't work for me, won't work. Now I get to show that to the court. And
This litany of bad acts that you
yeah,
list out.
yeah. And so it becomes something where, okay, we just took what looked to be a negative up front as a positive in the long-term litigation strategy. Now, I truly believe this case is going to settle. Most cases, 95 or 97% of cases settle.
Yeah.
And so this one will too. But it took a little bit of time to get us to a point where that slap that we finally got in meant something. It just doesn't pay to, complain up front about the little stuff. Let it build. Let it, do the right thing no matter what the other side's doing, and eventually it's going to pay dividends.
And when you're talking about co-parenting, you want to be the one to come in with the positive story.
Right.
It is so much more impactful than saying the other side is bad and all the bad things they do. Yeah, that's important too. I mean, it has an impact. But when you come in and you say, you know what, I reached out to the other side. They asked for this. I said, okay. It was hurting my time. It was hurting my schedule. I made it because it was important for the other side to do that. They wanted to be a part of this. I made sure because I told them every time that they had a soccer game and I invited them. Hell, I went and picked them up because they didn't have a ride. I picked them up and took them to the soccer game. Those kind of positive things are 10 times more impactful for each one little negative thing.
Yeah.
For the judges. And when they have to make a decision, every time they will cite to those positive things. Cite to it every time.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing is if you do that, not only are you more likely to succeed in litigation if you can't reach an agreement, but usually lends to the agreement. If you're always the one, yeah, okay, I'm going to take this one too. I'm going to, they always say, well, why should I give in? It's not giving in. It's giving your child what the child may need. But okay, say it is giving in. Say it doesn't matter. It's six of one, half a dozen of another, but they want it that way. What happens if you do it? I don't remember if it's judo or something else, but years ago I heard that and I think it's judo, where rather than resist an attack, right? If somebody grabs you, you don't try to pull away, because what happens when you pull away? They're going to tighten their grip.
Right.
Instead, you relax into it, and they're more likely to relax your grip, right? Well, the same thing applies here. Now, we one of the things I like to suggest people do is there's a book out there called Parenting with Love and Logic. Okay, it's by Klein and Fay. It's a fairly easy read, and it's about how to parent kids. How do you get kids? How do you stay out of the fight, the power struggle with the kids, particularly once they get into their terrible twos and they're now getting up towards school age. It's one of the strategies they suggest, that I suggest people read, not because I think that they're bad parents and they need to learn how to parent their kids better. Not at all. It's the strategies work with the co-parent too.
Right.
So, it's one of the things that they do, and there's a litany of suggestions that they make. But the one that I like to come out with first is when you're dealing with a child who is complaining about getting ready for school, okay, they don't want to get dressed, whatever. The parent walks in and says, well, okay, got to get you ready for school. Do you want to wear the blue pants or the green pants? Okay. Well, you can live with either one. It doesn't matter, right?
Right.
But now the kid gets a choice. They feel like they're participating. They're more likely to cooperate. You do the same thing with a parent. Well, look, okay, we've got this problem. Here are two solutions that I think would solve this. Would you rather have A or B? Again, they're going to think, okay, I'm participating in the decision. I'm more likely to follow it that way. And that's something I tell people about mediation as well. But you're giving them options that you can live with. If there are always options you can live with, you never have to fight.
Well, and I think that's the key point you right there is, instead of arguing, instead of taking a position, problem solve.
Right.
Come at a disagreement or an issue from an approach of, how do we solve this problem? You've got a valid concern on your side, or maybe not, but even if it's invalid, it's still something that has to be addressed. You and the other side have the same issue. How do you solve that problem?
Right.
Come at an approach for problem solving instead of, well, I'm right and you're wrong, and I'm going to tell you and I'm going to show you why you're wrong.
Right. And how many times have you been able to introduce as an exhibit a text string where your client, well, it doesn't matter. Sometimes we're on the wrong side of this, right?
Right.
But one person is saying, look, this is a concern. And the other one says, tough beans, I'm not going to help you. Versus, the other person comes out and says, well, this is a problem. And your client hopefully is the one saying, how can I solve this? Right? The
Right.
judge will latch onto that in a nanosecond,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're going to go with that. Even if it's not necessarily the best decision, they're going to go with it because you're trying to problem solve. And that's what they want, because they don't want to see you back in their courtroom. They've got enough to do.
No, absolutely. Anything that you could do to keep yourself out of their courtroom, they're in favor of.
Yeah, and so if they're going to view you as the problem solver and the other as the problem, you're probably going to succeed in whatever it is you're in the courtroom for.
Well, and that leads to, it's all about communications. Especially, not only when you have to do it with the parent, but if the parent's in another state, the communications now went from being super important to out of the sky important.
Yeah.
Because you don't have that daily ability to interact, or during every week to interact with a child. So how do you maintain that? How do you co-parent?
Well, beautifully now we have virtual visits, right? The FaceTimes and the ability to get on the phone and talk to your child from the other side of the world sometimes, right? But no, you're right. I mean, that's the thing that I like to invite people to do is look for ways of increasing the contact. That is counterintuitive to many parents who are trying to separate because they don't want more contact. They want less contact with the other parent. But I'm not talking about contact with them. I'm talking about with the child. And if you allow that contact, as long as it's appropriate, right? And it
Right.
usually is. But if you allow that contact, they're probably going to be less likely to come after you for other small stuff.
And you can don't have to talk to them about things. You can talk to them in a very neutral way about
Mm,
the child. So, for example, on an everyday kind of basis, somebody's uh, in one part of the country, somebody's on the opposite side. You can say, and you've got custody or primarily custody. You can say, hey, uh, little Johnny, he had a great day in school today. He came home very excited. That could be something in a quick email. If that other parent calls to talk to the child at night, because that's often we have, evening phone calls. When you pick up the phone for them to talk with the child, hey, I just wanted to let you know that, Johnny had a great day in school today. You might want to talk to him about it.
yeah.
The teacher said that he did really good on this project. There's nothing to argue about. It's innocuous information that's beneficial to the other parent. If you put it in a text message even before, you might say, hey, when you have your phone call tonight, here's a text message. Johnny had a great day in school today. He did well in a project and a teacher talked to him about it. Now he has a topic to talk about the child about. You look good because you're co-parenting, you're communicating with the other side. It's good all around, and most of all, it's good for the child. The
Yeah.
child's now going to have a better experience with both you and the other parent.
Yeah. And it amazes me how few people or how a few people miss that entirely.
No, but the judges don't.
No, they don't. They pay attention to all these things. Yeah. And that's not to say I mean relationships have failed, right? We have a good living because relationships fail. So there are going to be conflicts. You're going to experience those. It's all about how you approach them.
Yep.
And if you approach them with a conflictual attitude, you're going to get conflict and it's going to be expensive. If you approach it with more of a cooperative approach and problem solving, maybe it's still going to go to court, but at least you're going to look like the problem solver and it's probably going to go your way.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll happily take your money,
Yeah.
but ultimately, we're here to help you get through this, solve the
Yeah.
problems, get what's out of the courtroom, get what's best for your child, and we represent people to get, their interests. But ultimately, the judge is there to make what's for the judge. And so you can't be selfish in your representation. You can't be selfish in your request to the judge because they want to see that co-parenting.
Yeah.
And if that's not there, guess what? That might affect your child
Yeah,
custody.
it probably will.
And it probably
And
will.
I tell people all the time that well, I liken what I do to the opposite of a criminal defense attorney. Now, I'm not dissing criminal defense attorneys; we need them, but it's they represent bad people on their best day, right? They always look great. They're always dressed well. They don't have all their gang stuff showing, whatever that may be, right?
Right.
But we represent really good people on their worst day.
Yeah.
That this is the worst time in their lives, and this stuff brings out the worst, right?
Yeah,
But if
absolutely.
the judge sees the worst, then you're going to have a harder time. So I also tell people, I never get rich off of any one client. Even
Yeah.
in fact, the more wealthy clients that come in, they usually want to keep their money, so they do what they can to settle and get out of there. But we will never get rich off of any one client. So we try to do this in the best possible way. We have, as you know, we have two rules in this office, just two. Number one, we want to make this place a place where everybody wants to come to work. We work as a team, and so we've got the resources of our entire team. I think we're
benefit-
the second or third largest dedicated family law firm in Nevada. So, we've got a team, we've got a lot of experience, we've got a lot of know-how, and we work as a team, but we've got to act like it, right? We've got to care enough about each other to help each other. That's rule number one.
And that rule benefits the clients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the second one is close to it, which is that the client comes in and has the best possible experience, right? That doesn't mean we win. We don't win all of our the goals
wish.
I wish, yeah. We can't always achieve the client's goals, right? They may be out of reach from the start, but we're going to do our best. We're going to give them the best possible experience. And with those two rules in place, nothing else really matters. And so if we're working with them, we're trying to get them to see things the way the judge is going to be looking at this, they're going to have a good outcome,
Yeah.
relatively speaking.
And that's ultimately, that's all we can do is get the best possible outcome under the circumstances and facts that come to us.
Right.
I think that's about all we have on this. I mean, we might talk about any questions that answers that we can offer on this, and you know, thanks for everybody for listening in at this.
Yeah, if you've got any questions or things, of course, the best possible scenario is talk to an attorney. Right? Don't rely on what you see on Google. Most of it's probably pretty good, but it's not the same as a law degree, and it certainly doesn't replace the experience of a good lawyer. So if you have specific needs, get advice detailed or tailored to those needs. But contact us. Send us, contact us through our website or through social media. Let us know what's on your mind, and we can probably address it.
Yeah, so we can know this, help you with the specifics of your case potentially, and an attorney, a good attorney, is going to know the judge in your case, and knowing the judge in your case is extremely important. And you're going to get that when you go see the attorney, get a consultation, and figure out what makes sense for your particular situation, because everybody's case is unique.
Right. And I'd like to think that there's nobody that will exceed our abilities here. But, it's all about fit. And talking about hiring an attorney wasn't something I was thinking about talking about. But, fit is everything. You've got to find somebody that you can work with, somebody that you believe in, somebody who you'll follow their advice. Because if you don't follow their advice, they can't help you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for paying attention. We may be a little long-winded, but hopefully we've helped you with something. If you have any questions, give us a call.
Reach out to us. Yeah,
Yep.
email, phone call, website. We like it all.
Yep. All right. Thank you.